Welcome back. So now in the next maybe 1 hour or a little bit more than 1 hour, we are going to the revision lecture, the part 1, because next week we are still going to do another part of the revision, but the contents wouldn't be repeated. I'm going to record all the information from those 2 revision lectures. Fundamentally, I think you need to do your work. And if you have any questions, you can ask me. As I mentioned in the email today, if you have any question, you can ask me in this week, and I will reply publicly to all the class in the next week lecture. Okay. All right. So also, because the revision in the revision lecture, we are not going to. We have limited discussion on the real questions. So those we are mostly like to discuss the exam information, exam details, and deal with your queries. So please feel free to speak out. I actually mean, yeah. So can you turn on your voice? Unmute your microphone. So in this way, if you have any question, just ask to the class and also to me. Okay. Feel free to ask orally, because actually from my side, it's not very convenient if I talk and at the same time check the chat box. Okay, so final exam. First, the final exam will occur on 30th of October. So it has been quite early, just in 1 week, I think after, is this 1 week or two weeks after next week? Right? So we do have limited time, but also it means we just finish the revision and then to enter the final exam. So probably it will be more efficient for all of us. Okay, so the exam will be totally online. The time will be 2.5 hours, but you are giving an 8-hour window. So that means, so you can get access to the online exam from 1:30 p.m. on that day. But if you couldn't access at that time, you can access still within 8 hours from 1:30. But once you have accessed the online exam, then you only have 2.5 hours to write down answers in the system. Any question? No, okay, yeah. So because now we have got the exam questions ready, but we haven't really set up the online exam environment for now. So maybe I will give you more updates next week if there's something interesting, something new about the final exam setups. Okay. So the final exam will be 55 marks. So that is 55% of your total grades. There will be 6 questions in the final exam. I need to emphasize here. So today in the afternoon, I just updated the slides. So the information here is the most updated information. But if you have downloaded the slides before this afternoon, can you please do another download from the Blackboard? As I mentioned before, because in the recent weeks, the school and the faculty are updating the exam questions. So there are a lot of different rounds, several rounds of discussion or negotiations regarding those questions. So the last version was not up to date. So this version is the accurate information. Okay. So you will have 6 questions in the final exam. And from question 1 to question 5, those are the case study questions. And question 6 will be the self-reflection. Okay. Question 1. Question 1 will be the short case question regarding the professional ethics and auditor independence. Basically, this has been covered in lecture 2, but also in lecture 1, we also have some overview of the fundamental information in the area. And question 1 will be 7 marks in total. Question 2. Question 2 will be around the area of risk assessment and analytical procedures, still based on short cases. So the coverage will be about lecture 3 to 8 to 6. This is a very short question, only 4 marks. Question 3. I label this one as a comprehensive case because the case will be lasting maybe as long as 1 page or more than 1 page. The question will be about risk assessment and audit planning. So the coverage is from lecture 2 to 6, and it will be 18 marks. About 1/3 of the final exam, right? Okay, question 4. So this is about the lecture 11 content, subsequent events and audit reporting. But as you know, so as we all know, so when we talk about audit reporting, the audit opinions, of course, we need also know something about audit evidence, about what is appropriate audit procedures. So it is also relevant to lecture 8 to 10. So question 4 will be about short cases and 9 marks. Question 5. So in question 5, we are going to test the audit test. So what test will be appropriate, what test will be sufficient appropriate audit evidence. So as we know, so audit test includes tacit control and substantive tests. So the coverage will be about the contents from lecture 7 to 10, still short cases, and 12 marks. Question 6, that is the self-reflection question and will be about the teamwork. So overall teamwork will be 10 marks in the overall total assessment. But in final exam, we have 5 marks as the self-reflection. So those will be the open-end questions. So there are more detailed information about the self-reflection on teamwork and the knowledge about teamwork in the sample exam paper documents. You could have a look of those basic knowledge and guidance over teamwork and prepare some notes on that and then write it down in the final exam and incorporate those knowledge into your answers to question 6 in the final exam. So now, question time. Do you have any question? No? Okay. Yes, you're right. So the exam will cover all the topics from lecture 1 to lecture 12, literally. But in each topic, in each lecture, we mention, so some parts are only for reading, so those parts will not be examined. But for the other parts, if I didn't specify, those are just reading materials. If I didn't state it, if I didn't state it's not examined, then they are covered in the final exam. Okay. On the other hand, because in this page, I have given you the general areas of the 6 questions. So you could also have an estimate on which topic might be more important than the other topics. All right. Any further question here on this page? Okay. So some special requirements in terms of the final exam, because that is the pretty much exam online, exam at home, or exam with an open book. Because if you do this exam online at home, I couldn't prevent you from the textbook or any other materials, right? So in this exam, I would require you to have the professional writings. So what do you mean by professional writing? In this exam, I want you to have complete sentences. I want you to have a proper format and grammar. I want you to provide no mistakes on typos or errors. So it is just because it will be easier for the markers to read the contents from all the students. And also the online exam is going to go through the exam papers, maybe go through the Turn-in or other special software. So professional writing or complete sentences will be very, very important. Okay. So this is the extract of the instruction. I just copied down from the exam paper. First, so you will be giving different variations of the 6 questions. So you are supposed to answer all the given questions in your screen. Okay? But please note, your question are very, very likely different from the other students. So I wouldn't suggest you to share your opinion, share your discussion with your peers during the online exam. Otherwise, actually you put yourself into risk. Okay. Do you know what I mean? Okay. Second, so I want to emphasize the online exam is individual piece of assessment are supposed to be done by yourself individually without assistance of others. That means assistance by others or collusion is not allowed. So if a student has been found cheating in the exam, this student will be referred to the Academic Misconduct Committee. So during this year, they are having a few cases, many cases, gone through the Academic Misconduct Committees this year. So I don't want you to risk yourself into this kind of situation. I believe for AYN 411, if you study well, if you could follow, I think you don't really need to have this kind of collusion or cheating activity. And also, as mentioned before, quality of communication is important. So I do expect proper spelling, grammar, and I hope your writing is understandable. Otherwise, if you're writing your submitted answer is not well understood by the marker, then actually you may lose marks. So also, as I mentioned before, because it is basically at home, I have no other ways actually to prevent you from referring to the materials. But if you, if you get the answer, for example, from the online resources, I would ask you to make an acknowledgement, citation. And I wouldn't suggest you to get answers from Course Hero. And I could guarantee if you refer to those Course Hero or some special study assistance website, you will feel regretful. And maybe also those information from that could also be misleading for you. So total mark, 55 marks. Any questions on this page? Okay. How to prepare for the final exam? Basically review the lecture, review the tutorial materials. So I hope you do have I think you have the access to all the lecture recordings and tutorial recordings, right? And also, please carefully read the textbook chapters because it does include a lot of important information. And also, for the tutorial questions, for the lecture examples, please make sure you can do the questions by yourself rather than just follow up the solutions provided to you. Also, in the lecture 13 materials, I have been giving you the sample exam paper. So I would suggest you complete the sample exam questions by yourself for revision purposes. Actually, those questions are just adapted from your tutorial questions. So just do the question by yourself to make a self-assessment how well you have done in this unit, and also maybe also identify diagnose which area you might to do more revision or more study. Okay. So we have already got the progressive marks weeks ago. So I know most of you get quite satisfactory progressive marks in this unit because so you have online quiz, which is reasonable, but not very hard. You have the group presentations, and in the group presentations, you also have the TEEP marks. So pretty much you got not bad progressive mark. However, a high progressive mark is not the guarantee for a good mark in the final exam. So I still want to remind you to do a good study in the next few weeks in this unit. I can't say the final exam is hard. I think it's quite easy, but it's not very, very easy. If you don't do a good study, it might be difficult for you. Okay. So all the best in your final exam. Any question? Okay, so easy. All right. All right, so if there's no more question on those slides, I would actually move on to the lecture summaries. Okay. So what we want to go through will be the key contents in each of the topic. We're not going to go to the details of each of knowledge points, but I just want to think about what part of knowledge would be the key areas you have to remember, you have to understand under this lecture. Okay. All right. So lecture 1. What was the topic of lecture 1? Overview of audit and assurance services, right? So what have we learned from lecture 1? We have learned the overall auditing environment. So basically we know there are professional bodies, some regulatory bodies. We also have the regulations, especially the standards and Corporations Act requirements. On ethical points, we also have the ethical codes. In terms of the assurance engagement, we know, our focus of the semester was about the financial statement audit, but assurance actually contains more than just the financial statement audit. Okay. And following from this discussion, we also talk about the 5 essential elements to identify an assurance engagement. As we discussed in some example questions, we say, okay, so if you could identify all the 5 elements from engagement, then that should be an assurance engagement. Otherwise, these might not be an assurance engagement. So the 5 elements are 3-party relationship, subject matter, suitable criteria, evidence, sufficient appropriate audit evidence, and also written audit report, right? And we say for some of the engagement, actually you could only find 2 parties. So if there's no 3 parties, it's not the assurance. If the criteria is not the suitable criteria, if the criteria is a very subjective criteria, it is not an assurance. If it's not the evidence-based conclusion, it's not an assurance. If there's no written report, if there's no written conclusion, it is not an assurance. If you couldn't identify the suitable subject matter, it's not an assurance. Okay. And also we talk about what is the subject matter, what are the levels of assurance. Also, we talk about the theories behind demand for audit services. In that, we talk about 3 theories: agency, information hypothesis, and also insurance hypothesis. Are you able to explain each of that? Build upon the demands for audit assurance services, we also discuss the auditor's expectation gap. So could you understand what is expectation gap? And what are the components in the audit expectation gap? And also, could you explain each of that? What are the key areas currently within the expectation gap? What has been advanced or recently improved in terms of the expectation gap? Any question on this page? So lecture 1 has been very conceptual, but a lot of knowledge to remember. Okay, lecture 2. All right. So lecture 2. What was the topic for lecture 2? I'm just checking. You're still there. No? Ethics and auditor independence. Thank you. Thank you, Kim. So in lecture 2, as we mentioned in the revision slides, so question 1 will be about ethics and auditor independence, right? So it also means lecture 2 could be very, very important. So in lecture 2, the fundamental knowledge is first, what is professional ethics? What are the proper duties of the professional accountants and auditors? What are the code of ethics for professional accountants? And so in APS 110, what are the 5 ethical principles? What are the 5 threats to auditor independence? And also in terms of auditor independence, do you understand the independence in mind and also independent of appearance? If I'm giving you a case and ask a question, could you identify the threats to ethical principles? Could you identify the relevant problems in terms of ethical principles? If I ask you to identify the threats to auditor independence, are you able to identify the relevant threats to auditor independence? And also on each situation, would you be able to also provide your own opinion regarding the safeguards, how the threats could be eliminated to an acceptable level? Also, the other part is the more detailed requirements from the Corporations Act regarding the ethical, the ethical principles or the ethical rules. So that means actually in APS 110 and also in Corporations Act, some activities are strictly prohibited. That means there's no way to accept those activities. No proper safeguards if you identify those activities. Okay. But for the other activities, behaviors, which may have impairment over ethics or audit independence, but usually there also will be remedies or safeguards which could be acceptable. Right? Any question in this part? Okay. So I think in the lecture, there are a lot of lecture examples, and also in the tutorial, you have come across a lot of tutorial questions regarding the ethical cases. So it's a good suggestion actually for you to go back to read the textbook information, read APS 110, revisit the lecture and tutorial questions, and write down the 5 ethical principles, 5 threats, and then try to answer those questions by yourself. And when you have the ethical questions, please remember, so first you need to identify the requirement, identify the problems. Second, once you identify the problem, you must explain why it is a problem, why it is a threat to auditor independence, why there is ethical issue. And if possible, you could also refer to the clause or the sections in APS 110 or Corporations Act. But if you don't refer to the detailed codes, I think it's still fine, because we only have very limited time in the final exam. So you are not required to code the detailed sections in APS 110 and the Corporations Act. However, I do request you to suggest the actions which should be reasonable and also with reasonable explanations. Okay. Question? Easy? Okay. Lecture 3. So lecture 3 is about auditors' legal environment and auditors' legal liabilities. So in this topic, basically we talk about the contract law and negligence law, or tort law of negligence, right? And we went through 6 points to figure out auditors' legal liabilities. Can you just recall what are the 6 points in terms of auditors' legal liabilities in this topic? So, duty of care, negligence, privity letter, contributory negligence, damages. What is the other one? Causal relationship, right? So, so for any types of legal liability cases, we just need to follow these 6 points and also watch out. Actually, in terms of the relationship, there might be client's relationship. So that is for parties. The auditors do have the duty of care. And otherwise, that will be the third party relationship. In that case, it will be the challenge for the plaintiff to demonstrate the duty of care of auditors to them. And also, there are 6 important legal cases you should cite on. They are London General Bank, Kingston Cotton Mills, Pacific Acceptance case. Those 3 cases about the duty of care owed to the clients. The 4th case, which is AWA, which is about contributory negligence. And then for third-party relationship, to establish the proper duty of care to a third party, we usually refer to Capara and also Ascenda cases. Question? Okay, so it seems the contents on this part has been very, very easy for us, I guess, right? Okay, lecture 4. So lecture 4 is overview of the auditing process. Actually, in this topic, we have introduced a lot of basic concepts, and also concepts has been used in the auditing profession, right? So I didn't, because when we do the map, the map has been very, very big. So I'm not able to copy the map of this topic in one screen. So the screen hasn't shown the complete version of the map for topic 4. However, we can still actually summarize what has been important in topic 4. So, for example, we talk about the responsibilities of the management and auditors in the assurance or the auditing engagement, right? Also, we talk about the concepts of assertions. So we say, okay, there will be two classes of assertions, transactions, or account balance types of assertions. So are you able to just record all the assertions? Can I just check you are still following? Thank you. All right, so we also talk about audit evidence. In talk about audit evidence, we talk about the different types of audit evidence. So there might be the documentary evidence, electronic evidence, evidence from inspection, mathematical evidence, etc., etc. So if we are able to list the types of audit evidence in our notebook, so we can actually use those information in your audit test design. Okay. The other thing we also want to emphasize in terms of audit evidence is, so there will be two types of audit evidence as we introduced in topic 4. There will be underlying accounting data, which is a fundamental evidence for the audit. Also, there will be other corroborating information, which should be consistent with those provided accounting information, right? So basically, from different sources of audit evidence, we expect we are going to collect consistent, corroborative evidence in different sources. Otherwise, there might be problems in the financial reporting and auditors because now we have finished the semester. So it's like if the evidence are not consistent with each other, these may indicate problems in your audit plan or audit procedure. So maybe you will need to further reevaluate the risk and maybe also need to extend your test. Right? Also, the other thing we also want to emphasize regarding the evidence is sufficient and appropriate audit evidence. What is sufficient? So sufficient actually means enough, right? Enough means, so if in this area you need to do a sample test, then you couldn't skip the sample test. If the sample has been determined, so you need to finish all the required tests. So the number and the level of the test should be sufficient. Sufficient also means in a lot of areas, there are necessary audit tests. Those tests shouldn't be skipped. For example, in inventory, we are not normally skip the stock take unless you have a good alternative evidence to replace the evidence from stock take, right? For example, in the sales, we couldn't normally skip the confirmation, receivable confirmations, unless you do have good alternative evidence to replace that. For example, in cash audit or in the business cycle of purchase or sales, when we collect evidence regards payment or cash collections, we couldn't skip the bank reconciliations, right? So, I mean, actually in different parts For example, in the audit of PPEs, so normally we couldn't skip the necessary steps to do the regarding the valuations to the PPE items, because PPE item valuation, revaluation, impairments, and also depreciations are so subjective, are so complex, and also usually could be very, very material, right? So sufficient evidence also means some important necessary evidence procedures shouldn't be skipped. So also, if the question is about sufficient appropriate audit evidence, actually compared to the normal questions, for example, can you design one audit test for existence of inventory? Can you design one audit steps for the completeness of cash collection? So those are the lower level tests. But when the question is about sufficient appropriate audit evidence, then the answer will be case by case. So high level critical thinking and high level analysis will be required in such type of questions. So you really need to understand how to audit in the area. Otherwise, sometimes it's not easy to answer the sufficient and appropriate audit evidence questions. Okay. Any queries so far here? But fortunately, we do have quite a lot of examples in the tutorial and also lectures. And also, I'm not sure actually, I think probably in the sample exam question, you also have similar questions about sufficient appropriate audit evidence. Okay. Then the other key area in topic 4 is the types of, and also about evidence. So in that part, we also talk about the relevance of the evidence and also reliability of the evidence, right? We say, okay, so if the evidence is internally generated and internally circulated yearly, they are not so reliable. But if the evidence is externally generated and also externally circulated, so it's not contaminated by the management, so they are very reliable. They are very strong, right? Okay. We also talk about the types of audit procedures. Similar to audit evidence, I would suggest to actually write down the types of audit procedures because they can also help you in the audit test design. And also remember, I think in the lecture slides, there is one page to link the audit procedures and audit evidence. And also in that slide, there are a lot of examples how to link a type of audit procedure to a certain type of audit evidence. So I would suggest to go back to see this page, try to understand that, and also try to make your brain moving. Yes, here. So for example, yearly vouching is for the occurrence assertion. Tracing is yearly for the completeness assertion, etc. Right? In this topic, in this lecture, we also have a brief introduction about the audit risk model and also the materialities. So I think it's important for all of us to understand the audit risk model and also the inverse relationship in the audit risk model, and also the inverse relationship between the risks and also the materiality, right? Okay. So at this part, I do have the case analysis tips for you. So if the question is about audit risk assessment case, so remember in your assignment, what has been included in this risk assessment? So the risk could be analyzed from the business risk. And also, you could also further infer to the audit risk components. For example, if you're reading a case, is this increasing in inherent risk or increasing in control risk? Is this increase or decrease in terms of different risk components? What is the impact on the detection risk, for example? And when you analyze the detailed components of the risk, could you also further link that to the assertions or to the accounts? Can you easily identify the account at risk and also assertions at risk? And further from those risk assessment, so would you be able to also come up with a solution? How would you respond in your audit plan? What will be your next step in the audit test, etc.? So we have done a lot of tutorial questions, I think, in the tutorials and also in the lectures. And because we skip a few tutorials, so I'm going to cover that in the next week's revision lecture. So go back to revisit those relevant tutorial questions and also the sample exam questions. Okay. So on this page, an inquiry. No. So can I say actually this unit has been very easy for you? Yes? Okay. It's not easy at all. Yeah, actually, Chris, this semester has been, so this year has been quite unusual. So usually I would have a very good feeling how you go with the study at different stages. But for this semester, for this year, I think I don't really have a very accurate diagnosis on your study of progress. So, but basically, I hope by now you could still see this unit, auditing assurance, is not very hard because a lot of questions, a lot of considerations regarding the audit risk, regarding the audit design are actually from our common sense of business, right? So if you could have this conclusion for now, I think you could guarantee your survival in this unit. And also, when we go through those lecture summaries, I hope you find all my explanations, all my summaries are not very strange to you. So you may need to go to visit the lectures, visit the textbook for detailed information, but all the information should be very, very familiar to you now. Okay. All right. So lecture 5. What lecture notes? All the lecture notes. Yeah, all the lecture slides. So yeah, lecture notes here, I mean the lecture slides. Okay. And actually in the lecture slides, so you could also, because I provide you the PowerPoint documents, right? So you can also check the notes I put in the note section. Okay. So topic 5, which is about audit planning, and also analytic procedures are also included in this topic. So in this part, what is important? Not many notes, but there are some, I guess. So first, what we want to know is audit planning is important. Actually, in any engagement, the biggest part of effort has been put into the planning stage. Because without a good planning, so the whole direction of the audit might go wrong, right? So what has been important in the planning? So in the planning, the first stage is the business, understanding the business, understanding the environment. So by understanding the business and also understanding environment, actually, we have done the business risk assessment. And also from those identified business risk, a lot of the business risks identified could be further relevant to the audit risks. So from your business analysis, you can further infer to the audit risk assessment. So to identify what type of inherent risk has been impacted, what type of control risk has been impacted, what type of detection risk might also have been impacted. Okay, so based on the overall, if the case is about the overall engagement, so based on your overall business risk assessment and also the audit risk assessment, so then you should be able to design the proper audit strategy. So the audit strategy usually will have two types: the lower assess level of control risk approach or the predominantly substantive approach. The difference is whether or not or how much you are going to rely on the internal control of the company, right? So once you decide the audit strategy, then you should be able to design the audit programs in theory. So coming back to the case studies, to the case examples of this unit. So a lot of cases, I think most of them, so a lot of cases could be about the whole engagement. So you are providing a comprehensive information about the business. Some of the other cases might be only about one area, area of engagement. For example, maybe only about the sales, maybe only about purchase, only about inventory management, etc. But the procedures from understanding business to audit risk assessment to the audit strategy and then to audit plan would be the same. Okay. And also in terms of the risk assessment, in addition to the business risk and also audit risk components, there are also other types of risk we often also need to pay attention to. For example, fraud risk. Could you also recall what have we actually learned about fraud? We learned about the fraud triangle, right? So what is a fraud triangle? We also learned the definition of fraud. So Unintentional errors, mistakes are not fraud. Fraud is usually intentional improper activities, right? And also, there are two basic classes of fraud. What are they? One is misappropriation of assets. In our daily words, that is stealing. And the other type, that is fraudulent financial reporting. So that is more about high-level problems, frauds in terms of financial reporting. So would be more relevant to accounting. And for the misappropriation of assets, it will be more about the operational control, right? And also, when we discuss the risks, we also, in different parts of the lectures, we also discuss some special considerations in terms of some significant risks. For example, going concern risk, for example, the related party transactions, etc. We also talk about the areas which usually attract a lot of risks. For example, in the area, if the transaction is very complex, if the accounting is very complex, then the inherent risk would be high. If the transaction or the accounting procedures really need a lot of estimates or professional judgment, the audit risk, the inherent risk is also quite high. So even though we just cover the risk assessment in lecture 4, lecture 5, but actually the contents are relevant to all the topics in this unit. Okay. In topic 5, we also talk about the analytical procedures. So in the analytical procedures, okay, what are important? Could you still recall how many ratios we cover for those analytical procedures in this unit? Four areas, 10 fundamental ratios. So each of them are important. Okay. So what are the normal procedures in terms of analytical procedures? So you are going to calculate the ratios, also to do the common analysis. And also you are going to analyze the trend. You are going to compare that with the benchmark as well, right? And also, so when you calculate out the ratios, then, so the ratio will have some implications to your audit. We don't worry the implication of the ratios in the business. Here, in the auditing unit, we worry about the implication of the ratios or the numbers, the trends, the comparison to your audit. What is the implication to the audit risk? What accounts should be watched out? What should be the proper audit procedures once you identify those risks or the potential issues? And then you will be also propose some actions in your audit. So what type of test will be essential? What accounts and assertions should be highly emphasized? In other words, what will be the accounts and assertions at risk with those giving information? Okay. So I think because we have already done the assignment of risk assessment and also analytical procedures, so a lot of you shouldn't feel hard in this part, but it's not easy to accurately diagnose the risks and also accurately provide the proper actions in response to those given information. So in this part, please do your work and do some further study in your revision. Okay. In lecture 5, before we do the audit planning, we have done a short version regarding client acceptance, right? So there are a few considerations about client acceptance from operational sides and also from ethical sides. You know, some required steps couldn't be skipped. For example, contact the lawyer, contact the pariah auditors to do a good, if you just accept a new clients, to do a good review over the opening balances, because those balances are actually not audited by yourself. So you should have a very careful review when you start your audit, start your first year audit, etc. Right? So the client evaluation, client acceptance would also be an important topic in this lecture. Question, please. Okay. Sorry. So the last page for today's lecture, the revision, is the lecture 6 and 7. Lecture 6 was about internal control. So can you just recall what has been important in the internal control framework? First, the current framework should be COSO, right? So what are the components for the internal control framework? So 5 layers in the framework, from control environment to risk assessment, to information system and communication, to control activities, and then finally to monitoring. And also, so in terms of the control activities, we also further classify control activities in 4 areas, like performance review, physical control, segregation duties, information processing controls. So those parts seems to be theoretical, but they are very important, and also they are also practical, because so when you consider control activities, you could also consider, do they have sufficient segregation duties? If this part relevant to any physical controls, do they really need any performance reviews in this area? What about the information processing controls in this area? So you can ask yourself in your evaluation, and then you probably would have a better evaluation to the internal control if you have good understanding to this framework. So in terms of internal control, also a lot of cases would be about to identify the internal control strengths and also weaknesses, right? So what is the implication of identify control strengths and also weaknesses? If there's any big problems in the framework, for example, big problems in the control environment, problems in risk assessment, problem in information communication, some missing points in the control activities, or problems with the monitoring, then apparently these will be identified as the control weaknesses. And if the company has a lot of control weaknesses, then probably we will rate the internal control, the control risk, preliminary as high, right? If comparatively the company has a lot of internal control strengths rather than weaknesses, we may rate its internal control, the control risk, as low. So the assessment to the internal control will be very important for your audit strategy. Is that right? And then further to the TESA controls, which is from lecture 7. So if the auditor, if the engagement is going to rely on the internal control. So first, understanding to the control is compulsory in any situation. But if the auditors want to rely their internal control, the company's internal control in their audit, then they have to do the TESA controls to ensure their preliminary assessment to the internal control to the control risk was accurate. Okay. And also when you do the control assessment, so you could also often link that to accounts and also to the assertions. And remember, when we talk about internal control, the control is usually about the process. So it's more about process-based, transaction-based. That also means the assertions relevant to the control evaluations are normally about the transaction assertions. Okay. So if we apply the lecture 6 to 7 contents to any case questions, so still we will need to link that to the business risk and also audit risk assessment, but the focus will be about the control strengths and weaknesses. And when you analyze the control problems, so you are going to evaluate the overall level of control risk and also understand the impacts on the audit planning. You could also further infer that to the account and assertions of risk, but still focus on the control issues. When you design the audit test regarding the control problems, audit design would be the test control procedures. So remember in terms of difference between test control and substantive tests, actually, when we are talking about the control test, we are testing the deviation from controls. So the number of deviations, right? But when you design the test regarding the substantive evidence, substantive audit test, so we focus on the dollar value. So, and also it means you could do a dual test. So the test could cover both test control and substantive test, but the purpose of the test, the objective of the test could be different. One is about the deviation from the efficient control. The other will be about the misstatement or the dollar value errors from the proper accounting procedures. So that's what I want to cover today in the lecture, in the revision lecture. And we still have a few pages regarding lecture 8 to 10 and also lecture 11. But I'm going to cover that next week because I think we skip a few tutorials regarding the contents in lecture 8 to 10. So probably I want to put more time, more focus on in the area next week. Can I ask any questions so far for now? So if you don't really have any further question here, so I will suggest you finish the sample exam paper by yourself. And of course, if you have time, also do the other lecture examples and tutorial questions by yourself. This is a way for you to do your self-evaluation, how well you have done in this unit. for now, and also identify any area you want more study in the next few weeks. Okay. Okay, so thank you for the participation, and also see you at 8 o'clock. So for those who didn't attend the 5 p.m. tutorial, so in the 8 p.m. tutorial, what I will do is, because this tutorial has been very, very heavy, so we didn't finish all the slides in the 5 p.m. tutorial. So in 8 p.m. we are continuing discussing the questions regarding the audit opinions. And for those who didn't attend the 5 p.m. tutorial, so I may, if we still have time left after this part, we may go back to briefly still go through the previous slides. But if we don't really have time, can you just go to the lecture, to the tutorial recording? To review by yourself. Okay, so see you at 8 o'clock.